She didn't say good. Another great night, right?
It's good for you.
All right, I'd like to call to order the second regional school committee meeting on November 6, 2018, this Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. Roll call, Wayne Adams, yes. Joanna Blanchard.
Here.
Bill Buell.
Here.
Emily Dwyer.
Here.
Marie Falzani.
Here.
Dick Hodges.
Here.
Lisa O'Connor.
Here.
Chris Redding.
Here.
And Dina Jones.
Here.
All right, we got the majority vote now. That brings us to the Pledge of Allegiance. Great.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have a lot on the agenda tonight. We've all had a chance to take a look at the agenda. Do I have a motion on the floor?
So moved.
Well, can I make an emotion to
Amend.
amend the agenda, please? To include a discussion on the November 20th business meeting?
To do what?
Can we discuss the date of the next business meeting? Can we add that to the agenda?
Oh.
The next business meeting is the 20th of November, and
Yeah.
Marie just wants to discuss that.
So, to add that.
Second?
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor of discussing it? Okay.
Of amending the agenda.
Yes, of amending the agenda to include
Approving the agenda as amended.
discussion on that day.
Yes, please.
All right, now that we've amended it, do we have any,
I don't know if this needs to be amended, but
Go ahead.
I don't even know how to, so I did a draft of protocols as well as the draft of our goals.
Yeah,
Can that all fall under the same bullet point, or do we need a separate?
are you doing the speaking for your group?
uh,
You can speak to them.
Great. Consider it snuck.
Okay, back to the agenda that has been amended. Do we have a motion on the floor? And seconded, we have a discussion now. Okay, all those in favor of the agenda with the amendment, raise your hand. Opposed? No. Okay, let's go on to the minutes. The business meeting of October 4th, 2018. Do I have a motion on the floor?
So moved. Second.
Second, discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? Business meeting October 16th, 2018. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved and
Second.
seconded. Discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? That. Okay. Where did we want to put that agenda part? In?
School committee goals and procedures?
No, the
No, the-
November.
No,
No,
the
N.
amended part.
Just
Marie,
make it
what?
N. N?
N, okay. Got it. Thank you. All right, brings us to public comment. I guess we're all set there. And next one, we're gonna hear some good news from the superintendent, which is always nice to hear. Dr. Bartholomew.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just first thing, we had, very happy to announce that the Adams Scholarships were announced for the Pentucket Regional High School class of 2019. We had 42 students from that class. They earned in-state tuition waiver for colleges in order to be eligible The students have to score an advanced performance level on one of the 3 high school state assessment tests, either in English language arts, mathematics, or one of the sciences. And in addition to that, they also have to score proficient or higher on the remaining 2 high school state assessment tests, and they have to have combined scores from the 3 tests that place them in the top 25% in their graduating class. So 42 students received that tuition waiver for class 2019, so that's a good way to start the year, considering we're only in, that happened the very end of October, and we're not even in scholarship season yet, so that's good. The other bit on this agenda, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but the John Greenleaf Whittier Bridge that goes over, our students here at the high school had petitioned to have it named the William Lloyd Garrison Bridge, because William Lloyd Garrison was a very important figure. They did not name the bridge that, but there's a trail that goes next to it, which is now named the William Lloyd Garrison Trail. And Mr. Seymour had attended a ribbon cutting with the governor last week for that event. So I thought that was just pretty neat, and that shows how powerful the pen can be from our students and having an impact in their local community. So I thought that was a pretty neat little recognition by our kids.
Great.
That's all I've got.
All right, that's all you have. However, the bad news for you, the
Lots
new
more.
business, you're doing most of the talking. So, going on to new business on A, Dr. Bartholomew, would you like to keep us abreast of MSBA?
Yeah, so I promise there's a lot on here. We will go through this at a decent pace, but if you have questions, please ask. The MSBA board met last Wednesday during Halloween, and it was a pretty good experience. Myself, Mr. Adams was there, Mr. Seymour, and Mr. Kelly from representing the school district, and we had a unanimous approval by the MSBA board for us to move forward into schematic design. What I thought was really nice about this whole entire process was that both the architect who we were afforded the opportunity to speak to again spoke up and mentioned that it looks like an awkward shape and the cost seems high, but given all the restraints we're working with, that's they felt comfortable voting for it, understanding all those pieces. Also interesting, just to note to put out there, we were not the most expensive project approved. There was a renovation and addition in Weymouth for $169 million. I thought that was, I mean, I've never heard about that, but thought that was a little bit of interesting information. But I have the letter here that I shared with the town, each town chief financial officer from each of the towns, that just states, Dear Dr. Clay, I'm pleased to report that the board of the Massachusetts School Building Authority has voted to approve the Pentucket Regional School District as part of its invitation for feasibility study to proceed into schematic design to replace the existing Pentucket Regional High School and existing Pentucket Regional Middle School with a new district-wide grade 7 to 12 middle high school on the existing site. And it goes on to just talk about the building piece. So that is a very big check on the whole process. And now at this point, we're working with Dora and Whittier to go into the details. So we'll be able to know what the exterior and interior of the building will physically look like and actually have some far more accurate numbers, which is, I think, will be beneficial to everyone. Anybody have any questions?
Yes. So when will they move forward with the more accurate numbers? Have they given you an estimate on time?
The guesstimate right now we're hearing is right around the start of March.
Okay. Okay.
And
One more good news coming. You want to let us in on the update on 30 Main Street?
30 Main Street, I had the privilege of signing the papers Friday. We now own 30 Main Street. I went in. It is, it's a house. It's got a nice backyard, and I will tell you, it's that there's no question that property I mean, it cuts like a knife between those two halves. So I think having that piece of property would be very beneficial. For the time being, I think we're going to prep it for the winter and just sit on some ideas of what we want to do with it. Inevitably, if everything passes, that'll be used for the ball fields. But in the meantime, while construction's going on, we might be able to use that as a storage place for some of the sports that are going out there before it gets torn down. So before we start doing whatever it is we plan on doing with it, we'll just sit on it for the winter time, so we don't have to pay any bills. And we did speak with the town manager in West Newbury to let them know that we will, since they have it planned, that tax revenue they had planned to have that last quarter into their budget. We will pay how much? It's a minimal amount. of
Oh, my
taxes
God,
on the
for the rest of the year, it's probably
Correct.
$2,500.
Yeah, for the rest of this year. So that is the update. We started that process in July and it came to an end. So that is progress. Anybody have any questions about 30 Main?
The proud new jewel of the Pentucket.
Mr. Conway is advocating that we should put up there's a Pentucket flag above the house. We should raise the flag. They've taken it over.
You're not allowed to knock about telling me. That might make an interesting central office.
So,
Needs to
yes.
be redecorated.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, some of us have to, if you want to tough it, you're in good shape. Yeah, trust me, it hasn't, that thought has not escaped me. Anything's possible. Anybody have any other questions about this? Okay.
Update on the regional agreement.
So we met with each of the finance directors from each of the towns. One of the primary reasons of me having this, the update, looking at the regional agreement again, was because it was last updated in 2014. It's supposed to be reviewed every 3 years. So a little bit past that. However, we did start looking at the language today, and they also agreed it would be beneficial for us to include in the regional agreement reference to a contingency plan developed by the school district. As you know, that's actually on here, contingency plan is the next thing, so I won't go into contingency, but they agreed to that language. So we reviewed it, we made some edits already, some of the things we'd like to see, and we will meet again soon. So hopefully, I'm gonna go through, edit the language they suggested today. I'm happy to share that with you, and we'll bring it back to them in another meeting. There's no significant change, go ahead.
A contingency plan if
Any one of the buildings.
okay.
So some of the language in there does, because of contingency plans, some of the language in that regional agreement would need to be adjusted, because in one of the scenarios, there's no question that 7 and 8, or 7 for certain, would end up going back to their home districts, potentially 7 and 8, and that changes configuration. So in the current regional agreement, there is nothing that says pre-K through 7th. It's pre-K through 5th or 6th. So we'd have to make those adjustments as well. There is a little provision in there that says in the event of an emergency, which is what allowed us to, with what happened with Page last year, make those changes.
On D, update policy, should we listen to Mr. Hodges initially bring this forth?
Yeah, why not? On October 23, our committee met at 6:30. We basically had more questions than answers. And as the answers have come in, I think at this point, at least for me, I'm convinced that we do not need to spend $10,000 with mask on this. According to our lawyer, she has stated that we could use, and she's actually recommending regional schools as opposed to just a singular public school, that we could use that as a template. And she suggested, based on the email I read this morning, she would probably spend 2-3 hours going over it. And I'm assuming that the ones that we could use as a template matched with ours would be very, very little money compared to the $10,000 headed towards mask. I'm very, very careful when I'm spending someone else's money, and I was a little reticent in the beginning anyway. So I'm kind of pleased to hear that that's not like cheating, because these policies have to be under the guise of Massachusetts state law. So it's not, we can't just arbitrarily start making up stuff that would be significant for Pentucket. There are guidelines we have to follow. In fact, there are guidelines that everyone has to follow. So I'm pretty comfortable with that. We're setting a time to meet again. We're going to be reviewing some of the local regional schools, checking out their policies and seeing how that could blend with us. I think it would be a good launch for us to, someone that's already been approved and is going down basically the same road that we are. So that's pretty much where we are right now. Yes,
Good.
Mr. Chairman.
Does the time, are you thinking that maybe next meeting you'd want a discussion vote? Or am I rushing?
What would the vote or motion be?
Either to go with an outside source like Mask or to do it in-house as what you're saying?
Well,
I'd be rushing.
Personally, I'll let the committee speak for themselves. Personally, I think we're talking about a few $100s as opposed to 10 grand. Maybe even just short grand instead of the 10 grand. I just don't like the idea of throwing money out there, particularly when it's not mine.
So if you and your committee feel that you are ready, then you'll just call Central and have it thrown on our agenda.
Yeah, is the committee good with that?
Yeah.
But I think it's more like $1,000, not a few
Yes.
hundred. So I just wanted to.
And-
Yes, all right.
I'm on the committee as well, and there was, aside from the $10,000, there's also a time.
Yeah, I think it was a year.
Yeah. For MASC to review, it would be $10,000, but in their in the proposal, it states it would take anywhere from 18 to 24 months.
Right.
Joanna spoke with Mike Gilbert, and he said closer to 12 months, correct? Depending on how aggressive the committee met with him and worked, right? Or met with the people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I can give a summary of what we've done with their questions.
So we'll wait to hear from the subcommittee then. Bill? Oop. Emily?
So this also is something that came up when we were talking about our goals. So I'm going to bring it back up again then, but I would hope that people could weigh in terms of if we are going to take it on ourselves, the timeline and percentage of policies that we feel could reasonably be addressed if it is going to be taken on by the subcommittee or any other part of this whole school committee.
Any more? Bill?
I think after the committee reports, I'd like to hear what the rest of the committee feels is, for example, what's the most pressing policy that we have to update? I mean, is there one, is it two, is it, I don't imagine it's the whole thing. So I know, for example, to bring us up to speed on a bullying policy, which maybe didn't exist the last time the policy was looked at. That's one thing, but I think that I'd like to hear from the committee before any type of vote is taken, the committee as a whole, after the subcommittee gives their report. So I don't know, thinking that way, if we'd even be ready for a vote on next meeting.
Christine?
So I would think if we decided to have MASC do the update, we would have to vote on that. Otherwise, updating policies is what the policy subcommittee is supposed to be doing. So I don't think we would need a vote if that's the decision that was made to go that way. The other thing is hearing that there's $1,000 cost. I'm not sure what that cost is related to. So if somebody could.
if we do it ourselves.
Yep.
And then we can submit it to our attorney, and then they said it would take a few hours, right? And then that would equal about $1,000, a few hours of the attorney's time, as opposed to 10,000.
Greg, do we know what the attorneys charge for a billable hour? 200? So it's back to you.
Chris?
So in response to that, I would say that unless it was something that was required by mass law, I don't even think that the lawyers would necessarily have to look at it. And unlike somebody said, we have at times in the past come up with a policy that specifically has to do with something, and one of them is the intra-district special ed students' siblings being allowed. So that's something that you don't need a lawyer to look at. It's something that's specific to our district, that when we have somebody from Groveland attending school at a different school, we would let their siblings go. So I don't know how much the lawyer would necessarily have to look at it. I know that when we go through the bullying, which is Mass state law, I think there's another one that we just did recently, then I would think so, but I think you would have to do that no matter what.
Lisa?
I personally would be comfortable having an attorney look everything over versus, having the school committee all liable. Make sure that, I don't want to have policies that can be left up for interpretation or loopholes or anything that can be missed. But I think it would be interesting for that particular policy to see if any of the other regional schools might have it on the books, where, a single school district might not.
Joanna, you had your hand up, you put it back down, you wanted an update?
No, I can give an update on what I talked about with Mike Gilbert, if people want to hear it. So, I talked to Mike about what it is that the MASC does for you for the $10,000. So, the way it works is they actually bill you $3,500 per year over 3 years, so that you don't have, the district doesn't have to pay, the $10,500 all up front. He said the big benefit is that it's committing you to going through your policy in a very particular way. You're going through section by section to make sure you're getting it done. What they're doing is they take your existing policy manual, they take the MASC reference manual, and they essentially meld them together, fill in any holes you might have, and try to help you eliminate the redundancies, which sounds like it's one of our bigger problems right now. We have some redundant policies that might be conflicting. They said that they provide guidance on what's legal, guidance on what's best practice, but they don't necessarily tell you what to do. So it's still ultimately up to the school committee how you want your policies to say. So as long as it's legal, they would allow you to do it. And one of the big benefits they find that their school committees oftentimes have a lot of things in policies that actually belong in the procedures and forms area. So it's helping you realize what is policy and what isn't policy that belongs someplace else. So in general, you tend to reduce the number of policies that you have on the book. And the way that this is done is the MASC meets with the policy subcommittee over usually 6 to 8 meetings. They say they're about 4 to 6 weeks apart. Each meeting is about 2 hours, and they go through. You can usually hit 2 sections per meeting. So the policies are sections A through L. So you can usually do sections A and B in the first meeting, C and D in the second, etc. And then you have the choice of either adopting those sections as they're done. So, or you can just adopt it all in the 12 months. So it's not really like you don't get anything for 12 months. You could be getting stuff, after the first 2 months. And you also do not have to go in a particular order. So like section J is student issues, and that's usually one that people want to address. It could be one that we want to address immediately. So you could choose to do that first. So that's what MASC would provide.
Bill?
I think, especially with the building project, my thought before Joanna gave a presentation was, whatever this number is for the final school building project, 2 out of the 3 towns are going to have a little bit of an issue. I think it's going to be a hurdle, not impossible, to get passed. And I think to be fiscally reasonable, unless we see that there are a lot of redundancies, or if we see that there are some things that we just can't handle, which I'd be very surprised at, I, at this point, probably wouldn't be in favor of bringing MASC in on this at the moment for a couple of reasons. But I think that we have to hear from the policy subcommittee, and I think we have to find out where we are before we would go further.
Any more comments before we move on?
She's clearing her throat.
All right, this brings us, you want to revisit the contingency
Sure, the
plan?
contingency plan. I believe it was September, you asked me to start putting together a contingency plan. I told you today we met with the town financial advisor, financial officers, chief financial officers in each town. Uh, it- It's extraordinarily complicated. That is a first piece. We need to determine with them what they are and what are not willing to do. And we already started just troubleshooting. If you take and put seventh grade down and eighth grade down to if the high school fails and the high school moves over to the middle school, the middle school then goes back to its home areas, in which we believe there is space in each of the schools to handle that. But you now need a team of teachers in each location. We proposed the idea of possibly having one of the towns turn into the middle school. And then those students from that town would go to the other town. So you'd have, that would save costs in teaching, but it would definitely cost big and probably cause double routes for transportation purposes. Regardless, we're guesstimating, loose guesstimation of this, just trying to get adequate numbers of teachers. Remember, programmatically, students now are no longer that currently have access to high school curriculum will no longer have that. That would have to come to an end. We can't provide sports medicine here at the high school and also at each of the, what would then be a pre-K through 8. So that would have to adjust, but we would need a team of teachers. You can't have one science teacher at one school and not at the others. So we're looking well over $500,000 just in terms of new teachers to handle that. Or there is the alternative that we do that just very briefly, come up with some emergency model for curriculum while we bring in mobile units or modulars to put somewhere. And again, we don't know building dependent where, if that gets approved or it doesn't get approved. So it is very complicated, I will say. Going through this experience or this activity, this exercise makes it very real, this building project. And I'll keep on updating you. I asked Ms. Naffer just to make sure at least once a month it's on the agenda so you know where we are and we can get you more estimated cost. Overcrowding, for example, when the high school goes over to the middle school, but the middle school barely has the space to handle it. They could do it though. It's just that the rooms will be used nearly at 100%. So there would not be a great opportunity for, like when I have my planning period, a lot of places for me to go because every space will be used. But we do that knowing it's going to be a finite amount of time. There's no question for morale that takes a hit, but in terms of the student experience, that is probably the best option. And I think we use this building first because this building is the more likely to have an issue. The middle school failing creates an additional problem where we might be able to absorb the 8th grade here. I don't know that we can absorb the 8th grade and the 7th grade. I also don't know that we can absorb the teachers. We could again bring the teachers over here, and instead of having, you're probably having a 90% classroom use as opposed to right now it's about 70%. And that doesn't do wonders, but we will adapt and overcome. That's what we'll do.
It's still at its infancy. You've been looking.
It's
at
very
it
much,
now
yeah, it's in it.
for 6 weeks.
I've been looking more at the new building and traveling into Boston than I have anything else. But yeah, it's in its infancy, and I look forward to getting you more detailed numbers in terms of what it would mean.
Any general questions? Obviously, there's a lot to go on here. Okay, then. Entry plan.
Yes, so in the part of my coming in was the entry plan, which I submitted to you. You saw that, it was approved. You wanted to update you. We've had, in terms of I sent out surveys last week. We have, as of about 5 o'clock this evening, 497 parent responses, 201 staff responses, and student responses was 127, but I believe that 127 is just, it looks like the Merrimack schools did theirs for 5th and 6th grade, And Bagnell looks like they did theirs for 5th and 6th grade as well. It doesn't look like it's gone out yet to the junior high and the high school. But that'll be done. But so far, those numbers were pretty, the parent numbers honestly were more than what I was expecting to get back. And I think that's fabulous. I think that's great feedback. And I'll be giving you a whole presentation sometime in January, February, somewhere around there, maybe what the target is. You'll be able to access all of that data. It'll be fun. And internally, we'll be able to use
It's gonna be fun.
a lot of the data as well.
Fun.
Fun, it is fun. Well, you're finding out what everyone's perspectives are, so I think that's a fabulous.
Any
Yes.
comments or questions?
I just have a
Ray?
quick question. Is there a timeline for when, so it sounds like you didn't get them yet from the Page students or the middle school or high school. Is there a timeline for them to do
So I
it?
sent it out to the principals, and I said, I asked them to talk to their teachers first,
Mhm.
because I didn't know, I want every student to take it, but I don't want to disrupt the learning
Right.
environment for all the teachers. So if they let the teachers know, it's kind of maybe set aside. It might take them, if you've taken one, I don't know, it takes 10 minutes maybe.
Okay.
So if they could set aside a time to take it. But I would expect that one day I will come in, and it'll go from 127 up to like 600 or 700.
Well, I'll bring us the school improvement plan.
School improvement plans. So pending item N on our agenda, the school improvement teams, I'm sorry, the principals from each of the schools is going to come to our next business meeting, and they are going to present their school improvement plans, which have been developed with their school council. I think one for us to implement flex school grouping with multi-grade, and that's a big community sell. That's something that's going to educate. We're going to be teaching them this is how it works. And so that's one of the, there's no way to go and say, we're going to put an additional K in there, additional K.
So in response to that, what my thought about something like that is you don't want to do something like that for budgetary purposes, but if you institute flexible grading or grade class groupings, whatever, if there's a reason academically to also do it and it makes sense, then I think it's an easier sell to the community because you're not doing it, well, we have to cut a teacher, so this is the best way to do it, but we have to cut a teacher, but we also feel that some of these reading strides we're making in first grade need to be continued for this group of students going into second grade, whereas some others are ready to go to that. Then I think it's an easier sell. So to have it, I hate for these decisions to be a budgetary decision. If it's both an academic decision and a budgetary decision, then I think myself personally, I'm for whatever needs to be done to change things
Yeah,
around.
and I'm glad you brought that up. Because this, when we say budgetary, this is not, hey, we're making cuts, so this is what we're,
Right.
this is actually, we're going to be adding on. And
Right,
this is
right.
what we're going to do because we're adding on. But you
Right.
and I have spoken about this before, and the purpose of multi-grade is typically done because classes get overfilled, so they cram all these
Right,
kids
right.
together without thinking it through.
Mhm.
But from the benefits of it,
Right.
absolutely tremendous, as I've seen
Yeah, yeah.
several times. But again, teachers aren't going to be familiar with it, the parents aren't going to be familiar with it, so that's.
Good. Hold on.
Last February, I mentioned, I actually had done a lot of research on the IB program in Merrimack. And I just made, I'm not voting on anything tonight, but I just want to let the committee know that I'll be, when it's an opportunity to reduce the budget by $10,000 for a Marxist curriculum, I can't ever see myself voting for that. There are almost 1,300 schools in the United States that have embraced this curriculum. There is never any mention, K through 12, of American history, American literature. Not one single author that's an American has ever read by this curriculum. And there's no mention of our Constitution. There's no mention of anything. Now, if someone said, why don't we use this $10,000? I just saw a wonderful presentation by some Merrimack kids at the educational banquet we had this past weekend. And I was absolutely floored with what these folk were able to do. If you said without IB, we could be giving them money to continue the coding and the kinds of things they're doing over there, you got my vote. But not with International Baccalaureate. It's a Marxist curriculum that absolutely goes 100% about everything that we believe here in America.
Any other comment? This is a huge spectrum that you just brought up. Yeah, it is.
Well, we're starting in general, we'll get more specific as we.
Not everybody's privy to, but a huge amount of.
1.3 million, 1.3 million is a good
Between
number.
now, with the holidays, between now and.
In the red?
In the third week of January,
It's a good
basically,
number
when I'm
to
gonna
be
hand you
Watson.
where we
Keep
are,
that in mind.
there's gonna be a lot of heavy lifting and decision-making very quickly.
So one of the things that I think in the past we've done is a lot of this work is done by administration and then we're presented a budget. And then we start having conversation. I'm wondering if there's a way that we can format that if people want to participate in some of those discussions or want to have a time to talk about them way ahead of us being presented our budget book, I think that that would make a lot of sense. I know that other school committees
Normally
do
what-
things like that so that it's actually like a working budget meeting, rather than, okay, here's our budget, this is where we're at. You
Yeah.
know, I
mean,
think given the change in administration, this makes a lot of sense to do for this
Yeah,
year.
that's actually why we're having this, I wanted this on tonight, to get some sort of early feedback on what you guys were thinking, because, yeah, this is combined with the money, combined with the new building project, and then the change in how we want to do things with all our new leadership. It's all gonna kind of fall together in a very short time frame.
I think we were actually in a meeting ahead of time, and Greg and I were supposed to be meeting, and he said, you want to just talk right here? And I said, no, it just needs to be, for parts of it, it just needs to be he and I just going back and forth, and me just really aggravating him. But then after that, yeah, I mean, I think.
Worked the other way, didn't it?
Yes,
Aggravated you.
because I started going on my rants and raves, this is ridiculous, why are they doing this? And a big part of it has to do with, whether you pay attention or not, the shortfall of budgets coming in from the state. And my trying to understand between talking to Greg and talking to Dr. Jarvis about why, I understand that it seems very much that the state puts the burden on the schools for these educations that are 24/7, 365. Was it $350,000?
Well, the newer one that's just coming out is about 300,000. We have two others that are in excess of 350.
I can't even. So anyways, taking all that into consideration and then the money not coming in, or, publicized, not coming in from the state, should be, it really makes, well, circuit breaker comes in. But just
But
the
it
shortfall,
also lags a
what was it,
year.
the $1.6 billion shortfall that we hear about, that both MASS and the MTA are both going to the state. That's the
state
problem.
has a
But just the red, being in the red 1.3 to start, not a great place to start. We haven't done anything, we haven't added, we haven't taken away, but that's our start. So, building project today, fixing the budget tomorrow. We'll get there, but yes, when we have those conversations, we kind of figure out, I think that's probably really good. I mean, everyone's gonna have their own philosophical approach on what they'd like to do. I think I know very much where I stand. I don't know if I've ever made a secret of that, so it's.
All right, any more comments? Otherwise, we're going to turn it over to Marie for our amendment.
So when the policy subcommittee met before this meeting, we were discussing when our next meeting would be, and we all realized that our next meeting falls on November 20th, our business meeting, which is also the Tuesday of Thanksgiving week for those that are traveling, and it's also middle school parent-teacher night for some of us.
Yeah.
So we didn't know if we wanted to open up the discussion to maybe pushing it to November 27th. If people were agreeable to that. If that suited
I wasn't
everybody's
gonna be able
schedules
to
to
come to
move
this
it.
meeting.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Doesn't matter.
How about the 19th? Monday. No, that's high school.
That's the high school conferences.
Yeah.
It's middle school and high school.
Middle school's the afternoon, high school's the evening on Monday, and then it flip-flops on Tuesday.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah, I couldn't go to the 20th anyway, so.
all the first graders all day and then come to the meeting that night.
Legoland?
Wellington?
So I would make a
Somerville.
motion.
Somerville, yeah, in
to-
Wellington.
You got a motion on the floor coming?
To move our business meeting from November 20th to November 27th to be held at 6:30.
Second.
We got a second, is there any discussion? No discussion, all those in favor? Opposed?
Nice.
Well, anyway, I think you're on. No?
Doesn't it say?
We have to adjourn to executive session.
I.
Oh, adjourning the meeting.
Adjourn to executive session? Is that my job?
Second.
I. Roll call. Roll call. I'm doing it. I am roll calling myself.
Marie?
Yes.
Dick? Yes. Joanna?
Yes.
Bill?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Dina?
Yes.
Switch to the other
Lisa?
side.
Yes, yes.
You should remain seated. I have to read this to the public. To discuss the reputation, character, physical condition, or mental health rather than the professional competence of an individual, or to discuss the discipline or dismissal of, or complaints or charges brought against a public official, employee, staff member, or individual. We will not be returning.
My mother always used to take Visine. 'Cause she
Like
used to
every
get
day?
it. Yeah, just as, if it's nothing wrong with it, it's a good thing for you to have actually. For your immune health. No.
It's important for you to recognize that these are not done, well, the public knows these are not done in a vacuum, or if they were, they should not be done in a vacuum. That the school council consists of a group of people, and principals will be explaining why they choose a particular goal for its school. No two schools will have the same goals. But what we should see is that we have our district-wide goals. These should be nested somewhat underneath and aligned with some of those goals. And they should be in a smart format. But I think it is a good exercise for principals to come up so that they're held accountable, so you can ask questions. Now, there's going to be 6 plans. I think Merrimack Schools, do they do 2 separate ones?
Combined,
Or they do a combined?
I think.
I'll have to look into that, actually. Okay. But you figure that if they're up there presenting for 10 minutes, that is going to be a longer business meeting than what we normally have. So that was just a FYI. Anybody have any questions about that?
The alternative learning day?
I'm going to turn this over now to Mr. Conway, who's going to talk about, give us an update on the Alternative Learning Day pilot.
Sure. So sort of bring forward to this evening information, but looking for your feedback on it as well. And one of the things that early on in the discussions here in the district, both Dr. Bartholomew and I encountered were some questions around what people are referring to as blizzard bags. In that, I guess in the sense that they're discussed, and that school being called off due to weather in the winter, is it possible for us to have students working from home that day, for instance, and have that count as a school day? And it is something that over the last 2 years, there are school districts around Massachusetts who have begun to try this and pilot it in their own districts. The Department of Education does not have a policy around this. They do not have policy around it at all. They are presently working on some guidance and policy around it. They did issue last January, the Department of Ed issued a memo to districts providing them with some suggested guidelines to consider if they were proceeding with these plans. So in doing so, I did work in a district last year that did use this as a pilot. And I thought from what we originally started with and think about doing and what we arrived with was something that ended up being really a pretty good tool. And we certainly don't develop it on our own. We borrow from districts that do it successfully. Wakefield Public Schools has been doing this for 3 years. Burlington Public Schools has implemented it. My understanding is Amesbury, who I'm actually meeting with their assistant superintendent on Friday. They too had done some of this last year. And I think in different districts it's been done in various ways. Wakefield in particular really worked pretty hard to not have it be solely around weather cancellations. They were looking to develop a broader construct and that learning happens anywhere at any time. And in doing so, when we have a weather cancellation, can we implement what we know and all the structures we put into place, which I thought was a really good approach. We used a similar approach in Melrose, maybe not quite to the extent that Wakefield did. So what we've done is we've actually pulled together some material. There were some teachers last year who I believe had met with Chris Kelly to develop some things and at least have some initial discussions of what, if we were to do this in Pentucket, what would it look like? So I've been able to pull some things together and sort of touch base with those teachers. Is there still interest? Is this something that the educators are interested in? And there does seem to be some interest in it. Obviously, it brings a lot of questions. What does that really look like for us as a school district? And I have no documents for you this evening because at this point, I'm going to give you sort of a sense of what we were thinking. And if there is sort of an appetite from the school committee to say, yeah, we'd really like to see what a fully developed pilot looks like, then we would proceed. But we're not going to spend more time on it if the school committee's not interested. Because in the guidelines, the suggested guidelines for the Department of Ed, there's a couple things to this. Number one, assignments must still be substantial. They must be accessible. There needs to be oversight. There needs to be teacher involvement. And there needs to be a format for the district to review and essentially survey its effectiveness. And it needs to be approved by the school committee. So there's no sense in even doing any more work if it's not even something we're interested in. Never mind. So not asking for a vote of approval tonight, just looking for, we'd like to see what this looks like. Basically, what we're really thinking about doing at this point is limiting this to 3 total days. And that we wouldn't do it for more than 3 days. Districts have done a few different things. There are some districts who've said, we will enact these alternative days after 3 cancellations, which I actually think is sort of counter to one of the purposes of it. So that we would essentially use these as potentially the first 3 cancellation days, and that we would not do them on consecutive days. So that teacher feedback on how students did is really critical. So the idea that teachers might prepare for this, you'd have a cancellation day on a Tuesday, and if it potentially went to Wednesday, so you had 2 days in a row, that the second day would not also be an alternative learning day. It would be a traditional cancellation and would go to 181 as opposed to 180, right? And there's a lot of contingencies, a lot of things that we need to consider, accessibility being one, certainly if there's loss of power or if there are situations which don't allow for someone to actually complete the work from home, none of the work would be due the following day. That's something we have to sort of put into place. But there would be clear expectations around when work would be completed and for students who needed assistance, how they would gain that assistance. For everyone, there'd be an entire document which would outline everyone's role and responsibility on a cancellation day, from secretarial staff to administrative staff to the classroom teachers to the students and so forth, and it would be clearly articulated. And the reality is, when I think even just when you saw Mr. Seymour present at our last school committee meeting about the work that kids are doing, and that learning is happening in a lot of different formats. People do work from home, people learn from home, we learn it all the time. There would be no expectation that students would be sitting behind a computer for 6 hours on a snow cancellation day. That's not the expectation at all. It does not have to be technology-based. Certainly our increased use of Google Classroom does provide some great opportunities for this to be well managed and easily done, but it's not a requirement. It could be prepared. Oftentimes we have a pretty good sense the day before, whether we're going to have a weather cancellation, and there are things that could be sent home in the days prior. This also provides opportunities for collaboration with our various unions as well, so that we're all sort of on the same page about the understanding. And if you were interested, we would come forward to you with a sort of a formal pilot proposal with answering just about every question that I think we'd probably come up with. Number one, going through it once myself, but then also learning from those who are around us who have done it.
Dina, and I'll go with Bill.
I think it's great, and I would love to see more about it. I think it's a good idea.
Bill?
I think you're taking on quite a bit, two new curriculums in this, but I think this is long overdue. And without being a formal charge, I'd like to see as much as I can as soon as you can put it together. I think it's going to be a very valuable tool for the district, especially after the recent brutal winters that we've had.
Good.
I diddle that, and I also have a question. To lighten the load of Pentucket students' book bags, do we use CDs in place of textbooks?
Probably don't use CDs, but some of our textbooks have an online component where they can access it online, but not through a CD.
Okay. We found it to be very successful at North Reading.
Yeah, and I think technology's moved beyond that now. And if you had purchased a textbook in recent, I'll say even almost in the last 10 years, there's usually an online component to that text.
Okay, thanks.
Any more points of interest? Mr. Conway, you're still on.
Yes, all right. So we'll proceed then with our and we'll come back to you probably in early December. And yep, so, and we'll continue. Well, that's in reality, if it's not prepared by then, it's not prepared by then. But then we also want to have it approved, and then give teachers enough time to enact and prepare for it as well. So we don't want to say approved and say 2 days later it snows. Let's get it going.
Right.
So and communication with this is that's the biggest component. But we'll have plans for all of that too. The next component, yes, homeless students, procedures and supports. Yeah. Just wanted to provide everyone an update. 2, 3, 4. Pass those out. One for each member. The state of Massachusetts Department of Ed requires every school district to have a homeless liaison. They also now require every district to have a foster care point of contact, a POC. I am both the homeless liaison and the foster care point of contact. Did have the privilege to spend a day in Malden, Department of Ed, and training for all homeless liaisons and foster care point of contacts. And we made some updates to some of our programming, although Pentucket was, well, it's a low incidence scenario when it occurs. The resources that Pentucket had already put together were pretty well updated even at that point. The Department of Ed did make some updates and alterations to the legislation and so forth last spring, so updated some of it. This is the pamphlet that all the school districts have. I made sure today the updated ones went out to all the school districts, all the schools. But this is just sort of a quick guide in case anyone were to come into the schools inquiring about or expressing concern about their housing situation. So it's important that we keep our school committee updated of where we stand, what our responsibilities are, how we support our families. Being the communities that we are, there aren't a lot of resources that are built into the 3 communities because they're rather small. So oftentimes we need to rely on surrounding communities and resources that may exist outside. But we're able to do that, and we know what they are, and we'll continue to build the capacity of our own staff to help support families who might be having this difficulty.
Other than families coming forward and looking for help, how do you get to families to let them know that this is available?
So all of this is posted on the website. When students register this pamphlet, for instance, would be something that would be in a registration. We're actually going to do a January training with our administrative assistants, all the secretarial staff, around issues of sort of enrollment and issues around families which may be struggling with housing. So sort of picking up on
Like
being
flags?
perceptive. Yep, here are the flags to pick up, and if so, you need to contact my office, for instance, for guidance, so that we can reach out and support families if necessary.
So other than enrollment, would this go home in students' backpacks in case something was to happen to a family member of school?
It's not something we've done in the past. It could be something we could certainly send out the link. It's something that's posted at schools as well, so that they're available.
So I know that some schools, they have like an open house or parent conference night where lots of people come in. They might have those, or at the office, if they have lots of those typical forms, they would have these. Additionally, things that I know other school districts do, the teachers or the adjustment counselors, those people who are having the conversations with not necessarily the parents, but even the kids, when any of those staff members hear something particularly around like, oh, well, we're moving in with my aunt, or those kinds of things that parents might not recognize as homeless, but under McKinney-Vento is, that we can then give, the teachers or staff members can then give, the point of, whoever is appointed in your building to like reach out to that family. Sometimes the school nurse is a really good resource for those types of outreach programs. So
Yeah, and our guidance staff is trained to pick up on that. We actually, in January and February, for all of our staff, other than our secretarial, who will go some of that administrative training, we're actually going to bring in a trainer from an organization called Housing Families, who's going to provide on those early release days in January and February, those Fridays, 2 hours of training to all secondary staff, and then 2 hours of training to our elementary staff on the impact of trauma in the classroom. So all of our teachers, all of our staff, and across the district will receive 2 hours of training this winter on that. And it's connected to the impact of trauma if you're homeless, for instance, and sort of the ongoing impact of trauma of poverty.
All right, we have a question over here, Dick.
I work with an organization in Haverhill that feeds and clothes the homeless. And I was surprised that there are hundreds of students in the Haverhill School District that are homeless. Do we have numbers for our Pentucket family?
I don't have numbers for you this evening. No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
But we can certainly provide you with that.
Any more questions?
I just want to say thank you for all the work you guys are doing. This is a lot. Thank you.
You're not off the hook yet.
No. One more thing about the homeless, actually. We are sending Matt Smith, who is our guidance chair at the high school here, to an event I cannot attend, but he's going to attend in my place. For the public colleges are having a point of contact with the school districts around college application and acceptances for students who are homeless. And that's been arranged. UMass Lowell is hosting that event. So Mr. Smith will go in my place. And honestly, he's probably a better person to send than I to manage that particular component. So he's going to go. So the next one. Report card committee update. Mr. Buell, I appreciate your comments that we're taking on a lot, but one thing sort of leads into another, and maybe it's like when you're decorating a house and you paint one room, and you just end up having to paint the next one and the next one, and so it goes. As we spend time in October providing professional development to our elementary staff with literacy, and in particular, it became really apparent with our new math curriculum. Our existing report cards, which have not been revised in believe, almost 15 years, maybe longer, were really inadequate to provide parents with the appropriate information as it relates to what we're actually teaching. So the math curriculum in particular is a very standards-based math curriculum. And the report card, particularly at grades 3, 4, 5, and 6, really does not, it's a traditional grade-based, letter-based system without reporting on standards. We do have a standards-based report card at K1 and 2. However, the standards that are reflected there have not been updated since the Massachusetts curriculum standards were updated in 2011. So it became very apparent from the teachers saying, how are we supposed to provide the parents with a report card feedback? And the teachers were great at recognizing the report card was a critical component of our home-to-school communication. How are we going to do this? And it was just such a glaring issue that we said, all right, we'll start a report card committee. So we have begun. We met initially already to get going. We wanted to update you on our plans for this. Again, report cards are something that do require, alterations to report card would require school committee approval. We're setting an aggressive timeline to approve them by the end of this school year so that we can implement for the 1920 school year. Kindergarten through 6th grade is where we're at now. We'll see if that alters. After we proceed in getting some things in place where we have some prototypes and some models, we will at that point be reaching out to families, seeking some parental feedback as well. And then on top of that, we'll seek, it's a committee of about 18 people representing all grades, specialists, special education from all 4 different buildings, the elementary level. We'll be seeking wider teacher feedback as well, so it's a really inclusive process. But we have a lot of motivated staff who are like locked in on this. So we're looking forward to that. And then the last part of that would be if in the event we arrive at something that we are going to implement in the 1920 school year, we would then have an educational preparation plan for that as well. How do we educate all of the teachers in how to utilize the report card and use grading practices that are consistent? And then how do we educate the parents as well as to, number one, why, but also how they can understand how they're getting information from. That's our plan at this point. We'll keep you updated as we go. I think you can anticipate seeing us as a group come springtime to bring forward some more information to you at that point. So.
Any questions from the committee?
It's great to know we're moving forward. I'm very pleased.
For this year's report cards, like, are the teachers going to, in the comments?
Glad you asked.
Are they going to be able to put a little more input into what, the curriculum and standards are and how they're doing that's not reflected?
And I know
they
asked, what should we do? And
right.
I really said, I don't have a great answer for you. There's no easy solution. What I did offer to them is to write a brief letter that could accompany the report cards that explains to the parents that as we implemented the new curriculum, we're realizing that the report card is not the best tool to report information about how your child's doing. We have commenced a committee to begin to alter these for the following school year. But for now, here's a grade. Take advantage of the parent-teacher conferences to have that dialogue about how your child's doing. The fortunate thing is, in my years of experience, Harvard has yet to ask for a 5th grade report card. So we should be okay, right? So, but it is a key part.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Conway. We appreciate it. You're off the hook now.
All right.
Now I'm looking for someone else to speak on behalf of the subcommittee. We'll talk about the school committee goals. That's you, Emily?
It's us. I mean, with the
Dina,
3 of us
Emily,
are the
and
subcommittee. In your packets are the minutes from the meeting that we had on the goals. So, since you can read, I'm not gonna read them to you. But we did essentially go through each goal and cut it down a little bit. So the original goal under communication methods, we had revised to one bullet instead of the two. These are the protocols.
Oh, okay.
So would now read, because I am just now realizing that I don't know if it ever got shared to everybody. I thought,
I shared it, didn't I?
no, I think, did you share it to, at our last meeting, did you share it to everybody to look at? I don't know. Anyway, I can read it to you.
I'll go right now.
So right now, what the communication methods goal says as revised, is in an effort to keep the communities of the Pentucket Regional School District, PRSD, informed with factual information about what is happening across the system, and so that the community has the opportunity to make inquiries of PRSD, the school committee will actively utilize local communication opportunities to inform and hear from their constituency. Such communication will happen at least once a month and include, but are not limited to, Facebook, postings in town hall, email, meet and greets, Twitter. When we talked about this, felt like the goal itself was, didn't need to be the two repetitive goals, but we did need to, the timeline piece of the SMART goal wasn't up to the three of us to say, okay, well, you're gonna do this, and I'm gonna do this, and because that's like on all of us. So the action plan piece of this goal needed to be taken on by everybody, because everybody will have a role in that. Do you have any questions or comments about that one before?
So how would you recommend we go about figuring out who takes on what role and the timing of that?
Well, I think looking at the timeline we did, that like the timeliness that we did provide would be at least once a month. Mm-hmm. So I think looking at, of these modalities of communication, what you're most comfortable with, et cetera, and having some people, so someone could own, once a month, I'm gonna update the Facebook page. Once a month, Dina's gonna update the Facebook page, at least once, you know what I mean? Whereas the emails, meet and greets, those might rotate. I think it has to be based on what people are comfortable with. But I think the timeline of once a month is here, and whether we run it like office hours, here in the different communities, I don't feel like that's on me to boss
dictate.
Yeah, pretty much. So I feel like it has to be people owning what they're comfortable.
But I'm wondering if you can set up a schedule and then we all volunteer to fill the slots on those types of things like that. So, because I think that makes more sense than, I can do this Tuesday on this month, but have a schedule.
And it's not like we all have to do something every month.
Right, yeah.
Right.
I'll
There's
take
9 of us, so,
Yeah.
you
Or
do one
something like
month,
that.
you do another month, or
Yeah.
like one meet and greet, or.
Right.
And I also think that, I guess when we were talking about it, we wanted to hear what people are comfortable with. What, if you feel like at this point, this is not just related to the building project, but that is one type of information that we'll be needing to get put out regularly. So.
Or like a parent-teacher conference day at the Bagnell, like someone could go just and sit, and if anyone has questions, or something along those lines.
So ways that we can hear what other people have to say, not necessarily speaking for the committee, answering all their questions, although obviously the two-way communication is better than just like a push out, like a newsletter, like this is what we're doing, because it doesn't necessarily give people that comfort level of like having a conversation. What do other people, are some of these things that you're comfortable with? Would you want to meet, once a month with a group in terms of like a coffee meet and greet? office hours type of thing. Some people are fine to do it on their own, other people would want to have representation from all, you know what I mean?
So if you were looking for this, yeah, I shared it back whatever, but it's called SC Goals for 18-19 Draft for Edit. That's what it does. So if you go onto Google Drive or Google Docs and search SC Goals for 18-19 Draft for Edit, that's what the document's called. And you'll see all the edits that they've gone through and made and suggested.
So does anyone have feedback for us on what you'd be comfortable with to work with the public if they had questions, if they?
You lost me a little bit on that, like office hours type of format.
I feel like these ways of reaching out to people can be called a bunch of different things.
Yeah.
Some people would be more comfortable doing it in a sort of office hours format.
Yep.
Where like we say from 3 to 4 on, the first Friday of every month, if you stop by the high school cafeteria, school committee's members will be there to answer your questions. Or, as opposed, or, whether you want to call it a meet and greet, at the Bagnell, the principal has, coffee and that kind of thing to invite parents in and have those kinds of conversations. What's going on with you? What are the concerns? Having just a conversation amongst the stakeholders. But I think that what you call it and how you format it depends on what people are comfortable with. It doesn't have to be a stand and deliver. It could literally be sit around the table with whoever shows up. I don't even know how many public will show up, but so we might want to try some different things, and maybe in different communities it will work different ways.
It's really just given, like she said, the stakeholders a voice. They might approach us and say, "Can you look into this for me?" Or, I don't understand this policy, and you could say, "Well, I'll have to look it up, but I can get back to you, take down their name."
Right. Or this is the person to go talk to if you have a question about the whole. This is the person to go talk to. But giving them a chance for that, it's just one way. But one of the goals that people had put forth when we brainstormed our millions of goals was more communication and reaching out in different ways, because just pushing out via social media only reaches a certain demographic or section of our stakeholders.
I can see myself doing the meet and greet.
Great.
Okay. As long as you have a handy.
Would you be volunteering for that job?
Will there be a dress code?
Just
All right, go
through 4 of them.
Yeah. So the policy goal, we really didn't feel like we could totally tackle without the policy subcommittee
Weighing in.
getting, and like you guys all of like weighing in, because basically if we're gonna farm it out to Mask, that's their timeline, which we could put into our goal. But if we're not gonna farm it out to them, I think 75% of the existing policies is way too much to effectively tackle in one year.
School year, yeah.
So this comes back to the conversation earlier about policy. Do we feel like we're gonna spend the money?
Yeah.
Or are we gonna do it ourselves?
Yeah, and I'm not sure we're going to have an answer for that until we get together in a month.
And then we also discussed, if we don't farm it out, then we need to weigh what's most important right now. And pick a couple sections that we, can update in this year, and then, or 3 sections or whatever it is that we're going to do, and, kind of weigh them at importance.
And Dick, I think, had a very good point in the sense that we're not reinventing the wheel here, we're not creating something new. There are, from what I got from, say, the superintendent is that the committee and the public was very concerned, especially with the policies that are reflecting the new reality. Say, in the case of bullying, transgender access rights, etc. That's new, but people have done it. And it's not plagiarism to look at a successful program in another school and to tailor it to us. I think what might help, not to make a formal assignment, is to ask everybody on this committee, what do you see as the number one policy in need of revision? One or two, not more. And I think it would be very interesting to give that feedback to the policy subcommittee in a new formal basis.
Good, Dr. Holman, point of interest?
Yeah, so just a couple of thoughts. One, so if the goal was 75%, you fall short, what's the consequence?
We're still better off.
We get a D,
Yeah,
not an
you
A.
get a failing grade, right?
Not on a standards-based report card, is it?
Go ahead.
But when we review ourselves
Yep.
in the spring and go through our own,
Right, self-reflection.
self-reflection and rubric on whether or not we're doing what we're expected, then we're not. And I don't like that.
Right, sure, I understand. I think one of the reason why I bring that up is, this has been underneath the exercise, right? Trying to get these goals together for a school committee. We're in November now. Just do somewhere, start of September, start of the school year, I think is when. So, I think you address that number however you want to address it. It's hard to make a definitive thing, right? Because without knowing the subcommittee, it's hard. But I do like the idea when you mentioned picking a section or a couple sections. There's no question section J is one that's absolutely critical. Section G are the two big sections. Section J having to do with students, and everything having to do with students, student transfers, all of them. And section G dealing with personnel.
So if you want, I can't make this connect right now, but I can revise this to reflect
At
that
least.
at
J and G.
minimum.
Yeah.
That's good.
And if you guys are comfortable with saying, with the supposition based on what I've heard the few people who expressed their opinion tonight, if we do this on our own to, let's say, tackle 50%, 40, some number like that. And that way we can have these printed at least as a minimum. We can always revise our goals too. That we can print these out for everyone and maybe vote on them the next time we see each other. With those J and G. And I mean,
Was that 25%?
policy subcommittee people, I'm not gonna put on you what I think you should be doing.
Oh, go for it.
Yeah.
I mean, so
As long
I've
as we're moving
provided you
forward.
guys with another regional policy book from where I work. So I know there are ones out there that we can work off of, and I'm comfortable with that. I'm pretty sure I can get my hands on at least one more tomorrow. But I don't feel comfortable saying you need to do 50%, because I know I'm not going to be doing the lion's share of that.
As long as we're in drive instead of park, I'm going to be very happy. And that may involve doing a little bit at a time, or we may get lucky and have enough energy
We
to
could exceed our
expand.
expectations.
Yes. We've been in park way too long.
Continue? Yep.
I just I would like a number
I'd
from
just
someone.
like to add, like, in the second part, we also discussed that it says the school committee will support district leadership in the process of developing clear protocols and procedures. And they can't really, like, our superintendent, assistant superintendent, they can't really develop those protocols and procedures without policy. So I think that they would weigh in heavy on what we tackle first, because they need to know what they need to guide the ship more than we,
So you're saying J and G.
J and G.
Got it.
J and J.
And if do you want a third one?
Nope.
Just go with J and G.
Set the bar low.
Just go with J and G.
Set it
So
low.
what is that, 25% or 30%?
J and G is one
J and
out
G
of
is
six.
not
so
really-
And it's November.
16.7%.
It's
what
November.
would be the third?
That'd be four of them. If we
That'd be
wanted to do
four?
a third.
G, J,
So, sorry, if we did it, we do section C. J, prior,
You say provide
So-
sections
20.
G and C instead of percentage.
Great.
Yeah.
And so, code of conduct, says the, well, professional, Pentucket Regional School District School Committee will review, edit, update, and finalize business meeting and public interaction protocols, procedures, and behaviors by 2019 so that all current and future school committee members, as well as the public, are aware of school committee roles and responsibilities. This is purposeful so that the school committee can effectively and efficiently address issues in an informed, collaborative manner. And it was passing that around. I borrowed some things from the ones that we looked at. I formatted it in a way that made me feel not stressed. Oh, those top ones were all front to back. So sorry, I took the bottom of the file. There are ones that are front to back. Oh, look, they're right here in front of me. So I took some of the ones that we were given as, based on the conversation that we had, based on these protocols from Tewksbury, Reading, and Melrose, based on the notes that you guys had all sent that we got about our goals. I didn't have any of the notes except for from what I wrote down from our mask training, so I couldn't incorporate that. But this is how I started because we needed to start somewhere. And obviously the goal is to do it by January, so please take this as a starting point. I can share it to you via Google if you would like that, or if you would like to, if you would prefer to write things on it and we can put it on a future agenda. We don't need to decide it right now. I'm sure there are typos because I was typing really fast, but that's where we're starting. And if we can finalize this by January, we will have met our goal, which would be great. Do you have any questions or comments about that one?
Do we know where the feedback is from that PD night we had? That's what we were looking for in the meeting. We didn't.
No, she said she
Dorothy
she was gonna send us.
collect it all and then send it to us. We haven't heard of that yet.
No.
Right, she's gonna give all those.
Yeah.
Oh,
Because we thought that would help with
the chats
this.
and all that? No,
Yeah.
he hasn't.
She
I
hasn't
don't
sent it
think
yet.
so, but you look into that later.
My memory's not that good. I'm sure I forgot something that wasn't covered in somebody else's stuff. All right, so then curriculum. Want me to read it?
I can read it.
You can read it.
All right. In an effort to provide the optimal learning environment and opportunities in PRSD for all students, especially those with high needs, the school committee will work with district leadership to determine areas where professional development will be most impactful, and will make it a point to ensure that the curriculum and PD are meeting the needs of all of our diverse learners. To do this, by the end of the school year, the school committee will understand the new evaluation system, how state scores are calculated and utilized, and help to decide what approaches to curriculum development and delivery may be most impactful for PRST students. So we, want to be able to help you figure out what is, our best by understanding the evaluation system, how things are calculated, and
on the document,
Yeah,
you'll
we
see
changed
if you look at it, that we had added, like beyond the funding, so the minutes, you can read them, but like we were talking about, we want to know how effective the professional development is for teachers, that measuring effectiveness is hard, but measuring they had it or they didn't doesn't necessarily mean effectiveness. So we put in here, and I guess it just didn't say on this, like we added a sentence about, some kind of couple times a year survey, anonymous or so, from the teachers about whether it's you guys collect it or we send it out, it doesn't really matter, but like, how are you feeling about the meetings when you looked at your student data? How are you feeling about the math PD? Like, are you feeling like that helps your teaching practice to be the most effective? And I'm guessing you might already have that, but we wanted to put something like that in the goal so that we could measure it in some way that wasn't yes or no, because that didn't feel like effectiveness.
Chris?
I think to go along with that, and maybe we write it in there, I don't know. I know that any surveys or any information that you're collecting. I, as a school committee member, would like to see that, so that, like, putting something down that, information collected about what do teachers want, what did they think was, a good use of their time, what, did they think they really didn't need it? Yeah, any of that information that can then help us guide to support the decisions made for PD development on the calendar, fiscally, where are we looking, like all that information, I think, is something that, I know this was something that I thought was very important, that has kind of not been focused on the last few years, that I hope there is a bigger focus, and I hope that the school committee can help support it and make sure it starts happening.
We actually have a survey that we're finalizing.
Yep.
That we hope to send out within a week or so. That is that.
So I think even sharing that with us, like all of the presentations so far that you guys have given us, I thought I've learned an awful lot from, and I expect to see that continue, so.
Because we want the survey results. to
Right.
inform The calendar, like you
Right,
said,
yeah,
and all
yeah.
of those things. Yes.
Any more questions for Emily?
Just a quick comment. I'm just, it's really impressive when you look at the Google Doc. You have the subcommittee going through and looking at the stuff's crossed out, stuff written in. I think you guys did an excellent
you did a
job.
great job.
An excellent job with this, so
Thank you for your time.
It's neat to see that on this document, all the changes. Just clearly you're thinking about it instead of just going through the motion, which is, to me, really important. So, thank you.
I have it up. Can I read the whole, can I read the good one? Yeah.
Good one.
Beyond funding PD and curriculum, we feel like we'd like to hear about how effective the PD is for teachers. Oh wait, is this the meeting? This is the
the
minutes.
meeting minutes.
No, this,
I have
it's
it. You want
here, I just can't.
I
Well, we
got it.
can look if it's.
Okay.
Can you read it to us, please?
The entire one under curriculum?
Yes, please.
In an effort to provide the optimal learning environment opportunities in PRSD for all students, especially those with high needs, the school committee will work with district leadership to determine areas where professional development will be most impactful. And we'll make it a point to ensure that the curriculum and PD are meeting needs of all of our teachers and diverse learners. To do this, by the end of the school year, the school committee will understand the new evaluation system, how state scores are calculated and utilized, and help to decide what approaches to curriculum development and delivery may be most impactful for PRSD students. The school committee will support administration and district leadership in collecting feedback from teachers and staff about PD, the feedback forms of the meetings and PD opportunities, and 2 to 3 times a year surveying the teachers on how the PD is impacting their teaching practice.
I was like, I knew it was better than that one.
Now, on this, we have to discuss approve, but at this point, you're not looking for that, because we have things
We'd love to hear
pending.
more feedback, and
Yes.
perhaps we could approve them at our next meeting.
Well, if you're comfortable
With
at
the
that point, and all you need to do is give a phone call, we're ready to jump on the agenda again.
Okay.
All right?
I'll be ready. Just go right ahead and do that. I won't.
You could probably make a copy of this and just come up with the final version.
Right, right.
Oh, great. Okay.
Superintendent's goals.
Yeah, so in your packet, I had shared one of the last meetings, my goals. I've made some adjustments, not major adjustments. So these are the goals. Overall, there are 4 goals. Goal number 1, develops skills and strategy development in data analysis and instructional leadership by completing the first year of the new superintendent induction program. Goal number 2, by late spring, the district will have feedback from stakeholders about A, the district's most critical needs, B, and the start of the new strategic plan that addresses the strategies and goals that will address the critical needs most effectively, and C, measures that will be used to assess progress of the strategic plan. Goal 3, so goal 1 is professional development for me being the new superintendent. Goal 2 is the entry plan. Goal 3, keep the district moving forward during this year's transition and leadership by working with principals and other district leaders to ensure that meaningful progress is made on critical district and school goals. That is just a common practice. I mean, we're bridging a gap to the new strategic plan. So that's something we've already been working on. And then the 4th goal is that by June, Principals and district administrators' ratings of classroom instruction will reflect a shared understanding of what classroom instruction entails when it is being done, at proficient level. So that's the evaluation process being implemented with fidelity and purpose. So those are the 4 goals.
Does anyone have a comment? Dick?
Just a question. Does goal 4 also align itself with fair, effective administration evaluation?
Yes.
In other, okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
And not only, I will speak to you, I mean, at our last principals meeting on Friday, I went over with them what their expectations should be from me. And that we do have a process where I expect a self-evaluation, I expect them to come up with goals. They need to expect it mid-year, to talk about where they are with things. And that at the end of the year, what my practice is, they will provide self-assessment. And I will also do my self-assessment. We will meet face-to-face, and we will talk about how they feel like they're doing compared to how I feel they're doing. And they'll bring evidence with them as well.
Okay, thanks.
And that's obviously modeling what I would ideally like to see, but it's not possible for a building principal to do with all the teachers. But it would be the idea.
Well, this item will involve a vote. So do I have anybody that make a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a second. Now, we have a second. There's a discussion on the motion to accept these as the superintendent goals for 2018-19. No discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. LeBrecq, would you like to walk us through the preliminaries of the FY20 budget update?
This one isn't just me.
No, it's not.
Normally you'd be right, but I'm going to defer at the beginning to our illustrious newly gold leader.
So, I think there are interviews I've mentioned that I love school finance, one of the things I absolutely love. But there is an awful lot of changes, as Mr. Blubreck has had to educate me quite a bit. I go to GLU. We have a class for a half a day, once a week, where I sit in Mr. LeBrec's office and I say, what's that? What's that? What's that? How does that work?
I know, it's like
Raider, Lawrence.
I figured it out finally, yeah.
So, but just so we can answer all these questions. So anyways, we know that getting the budget ready now is imperative to make sure we have timely information to the towns. It's no secret, I've not made a secret of it, that one of our biggest issue is how do we support not just the curriculum that's being done, how do we support our children, particularly at the early levels. So we're looking at what we can do within the budget to make that happen. I mean, we are not going to go to towns to ask them for an override when we know we have a building project on the way. And we also know that we have some substantial increases that we don't have control over. But for us, that typically ends up being special education. So that is going to be the focus that we're looking at this year. Is we would ideally like to provide that additional support for curriculum, that in the form of teachers and people at the building as well, at the K-2 level and potentially administratively add some folks. But that right now, there's not, having looked at this, there's not a tremendous amount of wiggle room. That's just, because there might be something we can do that's small and simple. There might be some trade-offs here and there. But there's no way to have a big splash because it has to be sustainable. And that's not feasible with our current situation, which is not bad. Our current situation is not bad. But it is right now in the red.
More than we're used to.
Yes. And that's without us doing anything.
I think what Dr. Bartholomew, and he's put this on there basically for me. I know that they want to make a lot of changes. I know we've done some changes with innovation schools and all these. And I understand where the support level that Mr. Conway and Dr. Bartholomew would like to go to. So I guess before we go down the trail a long, long way, what are your thoughts on basically personnel upheaval? And that's really kind of what you're talking about here. Talking about, you know, are you willing to trade off certain things to get lower class sizes in assistant principals back into the elementary schools, at least at the early grades? Is these things you're going to support? Because it's going to require a lot of shifting in the general budget. What I do every year basically is what you know is I make sure everybody who's currently working here fits itself into the budget where they currently are. And I get a good look at where we are. Usually, you know, I'll bring the draft to you sometime at the end of January. There'll be that cute little write-up that says we're short somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000. And I kind of go, sometimes good things happen, and usually they will. The governor will come up with a little more money, the town will make up a little more money. You know,
Healthcare comes in.
Essex Regional Retirement may come in $100,000 less. These things will eat it up. First pass at this one's about 1.3 million. So,
And we haven't done anything yet.
we haven't done anything yet. So, I guess what we're looking back is your thoughts on trade-offs to
Now-
get to this point.
And Greg gave me I got a whole bunch of spreadsheets, so I can play around. And I can say, okay, well, we want to shift this over here. Oops, that does, you know, you can see the implications of it, but I don't want to move forward. Or I can, we can play around with it. We can tell you how close it gets us. I guess we're just trying to.
But, yeah, I mean, it's a big change from the way we've been doing business for the last 4 or 5 years. When you see on the personnel side how it will shift and where the systems will run from.
Lisa?
I'd like to think right now we're in a place that all of our educators are being utilized to the best of their abilities. But if there's any gaps, I mean, how would we go about seeing if there was gaps and, you know, reallocating people to where the best are used?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I am not looking to do, and I don't want to start pulling people out and shifting them all over the place. I think making sure that if I'm teaching, I don't know how to translate this into elementary terms, right? This is one of the things. Mr. Conway and I have spent a lot of time having this discussion about how well we're using all of our teachers. While some teachers might be working 85% of the day, some other teachers might only be working 60% of the day. So why is that? How do we better effectively utilize those resources? When I've talked to Mr. Seymour, we talk about in high school classes, are we running classes that are under 15 students in a class? Are there programs that are not as popular as others that we're putting personnel there to supervise them, but there's 7 to 12 kids in a class, versus in a kindergarten, first or second grade, where you might have 22 kids in a class. You know, when I look at that, it's a trade-off. It's a back and forth. Where do you want to put people? Philosophically, I come from a place where I believe pre-K, K1 and 2 is the foundation of any success a student's going to have, and literacy being the key piece in that. And that's coming from a high school person. I get to reap the benefits of all the work that we've done at those lower levels. So when I look at those, you know, that's some of the things you look at and juggle around.
If I may, I mean, if we take a look at scheduling, for instance, and be more systematic and thoughtful about how we create scheduling, there might be some opportunities there. We might be able to sort of recreate how things operate.
And again, I'm not trying to cut positions. I'm definitely not trying to cut positions. I'm just trying to, the people that we currently have, how can we most effectively utilize them? And if we had to have a program where one program's heavily overloaded and another program is barely got students in it, I don't see how we can program with barely students in it.
Yeah.
Emily?
So to answer your questions that you posed, I think I am very much in favor of smaller class sizes, particularly at the primary grades, meaning K through 2, and increased literacy support, particularly at those grade levels as well. I don't feel totally the same. We mentioned assistant principals, and I get that we are putting a lot of burden on the central office staff, but I have a harder time.
Well, that's not, the assistant principals wouldn't be central office staff, that would
No,
go
I
directly
know,
into the schools.
but they
Yeah.
would do some of the administrative things that would hopefully ease some of the burden that will then not happen, either fall back on the principals or fall back on the central office staff. So I totally understand that they are not. But more administration doesn't, to me, necessarily correlate to improved student outcomes, particularly in early literacy and math, which is, I think, where we need to put our money.
I would agree with that. K1 and 2 is going to be philosophical.
So basically,
That's my opinion, not everybody's.
I mean, just a quick little run through with what you said, and then hopefully I don't go too far here. Basically, normally you'd see us re-looking at class sizes at the elementary level. We have 2 teachers retiring, we don't need to replace them, those type of things, we go into the budget. We have very short retirements coming this year, about half of what we're used to seeing. So basically, you'd be looking at to get to the point we looked at, normally we'd be looking at a budget cycle of probably not replacing 2 elementary school teachers. In this cycle, you'd probably be adding elementary school teachers. So you might have a retirement, but you need to replace 3, so it's kind of like a net of 2.
And the problem gets, I'm going to go way too far on this one.
Yeah, we're gonna go way too far, I know.
More complicated, because if you're dealing with, looking at K1 and 2,
Yeah.
and one class has 19, another class has 22, another it averages 22, and then the next grade averages 18, and you add a teacher in, where are you adding the teacher? Are you adding them into the class of 22, so that all of a sudden there's 12 kids average per class? Or are you saying, look, this is an opportunity for us to implement flexible grouping with multi-grade? That's a big community sell. That's something that someone has to educate the people who are going to be teaching it. This is how it works. And so that's one of the. There's no way to go and say we're going to put an additional game.
So in response to that, what my thought about something like that is you don't want to do something like that for budgetary purposes, but if you institute flexible grading or grade class groupings, whatever, if there's a reason academically to also do it and it makes sense, then I think it's an easier sell to the community, because you're not doing it, well, we have to cut a teacher, so this is the best way to do it, but we have to cut a teacher, but we also feel that some of these reading strides we're making in first grade need to be continued for this group of students going into second grade, whereas some others are ready to go to that. Then I think it's an easier sell. So to have it, I hate for these decisions to be a budgetary decision. If it's both an academic decision and a budgetary decision, then I think myself personally, I'm for whatever needs to be done to change things around.
And I'm glad you brought that up. Because when we say budgetary, this is not, hey, we're making cuts, so this is
Right.
This is actually, we're going to be adding on. And
Right,
this is
right.
what we're gonna do because we're adding on. But you
Right.
and I have spoken about this before, and the purpose of multi-grade is typically done because classes get overfilled, so they cram all these
Right,
kids
right.
together without thinking it through. But from the benefits of it,
Right.
absolutely tremendous, as I've seen
Yeah.
several times. But again, teachers aren't going to be familiar with it, the parents aren't going to be familiar with it, so that's.
Yes, hold on.
Last February, I mentioned, I actually had done a lot of research on the IB program in Merrimack. And I just said, I'm not voting on anything tonight, but I just want to let the committee know that I'll be, when it's an opportunity to reduce the budget by $10,000 for a Marxist curriculum, I can't ever see myself voting for that. There are almost 1,300 schools in the United States that have embraced this curriculum. There is never any mention, K through 12, of American history, American literature. Not one single author that's an American has ever read by this curriculum. And there's no mention of our Constitution. There's no mention of anything. Now, if someone said, why don't we use this $10,000? I just saw a wonderful presentation by some Merrimack kids at the educational banquet we had this past weekend. And I was absolutely floored with what these folk were able to do. If you said without IB, we could be giving them money to continue the coding and the kinds of things they're doing over there, you got my vote. But not with International Baccalaureate. It's a Marxist curriculum that absolutely goes 100% about everything that we believe here in America.
No comment. This is a huge spectrum in addition to all that. Yeah, it is.
Well, we're starting in general, we'll get more specific as we.
Not everybody's privy to but a huge amount of money.
$1.3 million. 1.3 million is a good
Between
number.
now, with the holidays between now and
In the red.
in the third week of January,
It's a good
basically,
number
when I'm
to
going
be
to hand you
involved.
where we
Keep
are,
that in mind.
there's going to be a lot of heavy lifting and decision making very quickly.
So one of the things that I think in the past we've done is a lot of this work is done by administration and then we're presented a budget. And then we start having conversation. I'm wondering if there's a way that we can format that if people want to participate in some of those discussions or want to have a time to talk about them way ahead of us being presented our budget book, I think that that would make a lot of sense. I know that other school committees do things like that so that it's actually like a working budget meeting rather than, okay, here's our budget, this is where we're at. You know? I think given the change in administration, this makes a lot of sense to do for this year.
That's actually why we're having this, I pointed this on tonight to get some sort of early feedback on what you guys are thinking because, this is combined with the money, combined with the new building project, and then the change in how we want to do things with our new leadership. It's all going to kind of fall together in a very short time frame.
I think we were actually in a meeting ahead of time when we were Greg and I were supposed to be meeting, and he said, "You want to just talk right here?" And I said, "No, it just needs to be for parts of it. It just needs to be he and I just going back and forth, and me just really aggravating him." But then after that, I think
It worked the other way, didn't it?
Yes, because I started going on my rants and raves. This is ridiculous. Why are they doing this? In a big part of it. Has to do with really paying attention to the shortfall of budgets coming in from the state. And my trying to understand between talking to Greg and talking to Dr. Jarvis about why I understood that things very much that the state put the burden on the schools for these educations that are 24/7, 365. $350,000.
Well, the newer one that's just coming out is about 300,000. We have two others that are in specific.
I can't even. So anyways, taking all that into consideration and then the money not coming in, publicized, not coming in from the state, it should be, it really makes it. Well, circuit breaker comes in. But just the shortfall, the $1.6 billion shortfall that we hear about, that both MASS and the MTA are both going to the state. That's the problem. But just the red, being in the red 1.3 to start, not a great place to start. We haven't done anything. We haven't added. We haven't taken away. But that's our start. So, building project today, fixing the budget tomorrow. We'll get there. But yes, when we have those conversations, kind of figure out. I think that's probably really good. Everyone's going to have their own philosophical approach on what they'd like to do. I think I know very much where I stand. Don't know if I've ever made a secret of that.
All right, any more comments? Otherwise, we're going to turn it over to Marie.
So when the policy subcommittee met before this meeting, we were discussing when our next meeting would be, and we all realized that our next meeting falls on November 20th, our business meeting, which is also the Tuesday of Thanksgiving week for those that are traveling, and it's also middle school parent-teacher night for some of us. So we didn't know if we wanted to open up the discussion to maybe pushing it to November 27th. People were agreeable to that? If that suited
I wasn't
everybody's
gonna be able
schedules
to
to
come
move
to
it?
this meeting.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
How about the 19th? Monday? You know, that's high school.
That's the high school conferences. Middle school's the afternoon, high school's the evening on Monday, and then it flip-flops on Tuesday.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah, I couldn't go to the 20th anyway, so.
Legoland is doing all the first graders all day and then come to the meeting that night.
Legoland?
Wellington?
So I
Yeah,
would make a motion.
Somerville, yeah, in Wellington.
You got a motion on the floor coming?
To move our business meeting from November 20th to November 27th to November 6:30.
Second.
We got a second, is there any discussion? No discussion, all those in favor? Opposed?
Nice.
Well, anyway, I think you're on. No?
Doesn't it seem?
We have to adjourn to executive session.
I
Oh, adjourning the meeting.
adjourn to executive session. Is that my job?
Second.
Roll call. Roll call. I'm doing it. I am roll calling myself.
Marie?
Yes.
Dick? Yes. Joanna?
Yes.
Bill?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Dina?
Yes.
Emily?
Switch to the other side.
Yes. You should remain seated and to recess to the public to discuss the reputation, character, physical condition, or mental health rather than professional competence of an individual, or to discuss the discipline or dismissal or complaints or charges brought against a public official, employee, staff member, or individual. We will not be returning.
My mother always used to take my zine. 'cause she
Like
used to
every
get
day?
it. Yeah, just as a